I'm starting my day off with some Fortnite Battle Royale because I'm so addicted to this game. If you're excited for some more,
see it for a remote explosive in.
I have so many video ideas for Fortnite, and I just lots of guys. Yes, the new Fortnite update is actually going for battle race.
Fortnite became a phenomenon overnight. It was the center of pop culture, and it became a staple of many of our childhoods. YouTubers and streamers were eating this up, and their respective platforms would become overrun with content covering updates, events, and just showing gameplay of this new behemoth. It seemed like at the time that you couldn't escape it. No matter what you were doing, you would hear something about Fortnite. However, despite the game's sheer explosion of players on its launch, its player base would slowly bleed off. In today's video, I want to explain why that happened, how the game became popular in the first place, and how Epic managed to turn things around by riding off the coattails of nostalgia. If you didn't know, Fortnite's development was an absolute disaster. The game was originally unveiled in 2011 at the Video Game Awards as a PvE co-op shooter. This has saved the world as we know it today. However, this was originally supposed to be the main flagship mode of the game. Despite the game being revealed in 2011, the game hadn't even started development according to Epic's creative lead Donald Mustard. Obviously, this was a disastrous move by higher-ups at Epic because now they had just gotten a lot of people excited for a game they expected to come out sometime in 2013, despite the fact development hadn't even begun. However, the fact that they were able to build up some hype for the new title, considering that their previous works like Gears of War were so different, was good news for them. And shortly after the moderate success of this announcement, development for the PvE shooter would begin. During development, Epic made the decision to produce a new version of their game engine to allow for some more features they wanted available in Fortnite. However, this would be the catalyst for the slew of upcoming delays that would plague this game's release date. Since they were having to make a new game engine alongside the game, it increased the time needed to implement new features throughout development. This culminated into Epic deciding to delay the game's release in 2013 without a new date announced. And despite what people knew back then, the game wouldn't be releasing for at least another 4 years. In the meantime, they would make significant progress on their new game engine, which would be released in early 2014 to the public. This decision to focus on their new game engine would be an amazing success for Epic's business, with Unreal Engine 4 quickly becoming one of the top competitors in the game engine world. However, despite the success of the development of said game engine, Fortnite itself was not having such a smooth road when it came to development. Around the same time of UE4's release, Fortnite had only achieved a functional prototype state according to the team's creative lead. This was way behind schedule, so much so that the studio considered canceling the game multiple times. They had originally planned to have the game out over a year ago. However, they had only managed to get it into an early alpha stage. Even though the thought crossed their mind, they kept pushing through development and they began hosting closed alpha tests for the game to get feedback on the game's functionality. These tests included roughly 50,000 people, according to Darren Sugg, Epic's lead designer, which ensured that anything they tested would receive plenty of feedback to capitalize on. Around late 2015, while still developing Fortnite, Epic announced another game they were working on called Paragon. This confused a lot of fans and resulted in speculation on the potential cancellation of Fortnite, considering it had been 5 years since it was announced, and nothing had materialized. Because of this, sometime in 2016, Epic Games CEO Tim Sweeney would come out in an interview with a statement saying that once Paragon was complete, Fortnite would be the top priority. This would eventually come true when development on Fortnite would ramp up drastically in late 2016 to early 2017, which would result in Fortnite's release date being slated for 2018. In the meantime, Epic would give access to their new PvE mode to the public early for a $40 price tag. Once this was released, the reception for the game was mid at best, and it only really made a small splash in gaming news before its relevance started to fade. I think this is due to the game charging such a high price for a game that didn't have enough content to back it up, so most people just wanted to wait until the game became free a year later. After this relatively unsuccessful launch, Epic decided they wanted to try and make a battle royale mode of some sort that would eventually be their new live service cash cow. They got this idea because of PUBG dropping in the middle of their development of Fortnite, and because they liked the concept so much, they wanted to take their own shot at it. And Epic wanted this to launch as soon as possible, likely to capitalize on the genre being relatively new and to take advantage of the large player base that enjoyed the genre. So they decided to take assets and gameplay mechanics of Fortnite Save the World and put them into this new battle royale, which would take roughly 2 months. Because of their choice during the development of this mode to launch the battle royale with the building mechanic, the game was able to heavily separate itself from other battle royales, which would help the game perform later on. However, I would argue the best decision Epic made for the success of this mode was the decision to make it free to play. It was a topic heavily debated amongst the studio. Some of them wanted the game to be released as a side mode that came along with the price tag of Save the World to allow for larger sales on the early access bundle. And some wanted the game mode to be free to play because they feared that the mode would perform poorly otherwise. And maybe, just maybe, the mode would help sell copies of Fortnite Save the World. Obviously, we know now the latter was chosen, and for good reason, because when the game mode was released in September 2017, it would take the world by storm, and that's no pun intended. As soon as Epic dropped their new Battle Royale mode for Fortnite, it began blowing up. Within the first season, Fortnite achieved a whopping 10 million players, which was a lot of people for the time. But it was nothing compared to what was about to come the game's way. What made the game so popular initially was the unique cartoony art style, its building mechanics, and its appeal to children, which would help the game become way more popular than the gritty and more realistic PUBG. Because of the uniqueness of this game and the potential of its growth, many YouTubers and streamers began to shift their content towards Fortnite to capitalize on the large and growing fan base. Popular content creators like Allie, Laserbeam, and even Lachlan would be perfect examples of this shift. Their entire channels pretty much became flooded with Fortnite content to satisfy their audience. However, as we'll soon see, Fortnite also would be the catalyst that would catapult many and up-and-coming creators into the spotlight. Another thing that helped the game become a content powerhouse was the constant introduction of minor updates the game would receive. New weapons, skins, gadgets, and map locations would get added to the game constantly. This allowed content creators to always have something to keep their viewers engaged, which would help to push even more viewers and more attention to the game on social media. Also, one thing that I didn't even mention was the fact that Fortnite basically revolutionized monetization. Eventually, with the introduction of Season 2, they would add a Battle Pass, which was basically a paid progression system that required players to grind to unlock skins inside of it. This would become an industry-wide form of monetization system later, but at the time, it was a brand new idea. And even though it didn't come as soon as the game launched, it was still extremely important to the game's growth early on. And because of the playtime requirement from players to complete the Battle Pass, it would help to build player retention unlike anything else. This would result in the player count right around the end of Season 2 rising to an estimated 45 million players. Another thing on top of the updates and the Battle Pass that helped to keep existing players coming back was the rotating item shop. Every couple of weeks, at least during the early seasons, the shop would rotate skins out of the rotation, and they would add new skins to the shop. This caused players to have a fear of missing out due to cosmetics going away after a short period of time. So because of this fear, more players started to spend money on cosmetics, and it led to more people coming back to Fortnite just to see what the shop had to offer. Now, obviously, all of these systems would mean nothing without the game playing well, because no amount of player retention systems can solve the issue of bad gameplay. However, Fortnite's gameplay was so unique, interesting, and enjoyable to most players that these retention systems worked wonders. And what made this gameplay such a success was the simple yet complex building system that allowed for deep skill expression, and the fact that the game was simple to get into for most players. This is a formula that makes any multiplayer game a great success. So it's no surprise that Fortnite saw the success it did. And its player count would continue to rise with each season. Season 3 was pretty successful, and by Season 4 they had achieved 125 million players, 40 million of which were logging on every month. This was insanely high numbers for a battle royale, and around this time was when Fortnite really started to breach into the mainstream. News stations and sites outside of the gaming space began covering Fortnite. References were being made to it in pop culture.
Where'd you learn all this stuff anyway?
Video game theory. My dad said playing Fortnite till 4 a.m. was a waste of time.
And it had become a discussion amongst pretty much everyone. If you were under the age of 25 around this time, you had likely either played Fortnite or heard of it at some point. Season 4 also introduced something huge for the game's competitive scene. Now, SunnyV2 made this point in his video a while back on the subject, but I think it's worth pointing out here as well. The Playground mode, if you don't remember, was a sandbox-style mode meant to allow players to experiment with different strategies and to practice their abilities with unlimited resources. This meant that players now had a way to practice their building skills completely unhindered. Now, in most games, this would be a great idea. However, this had an unsuspecting side effect on the game's community because after this mode released, the large skill gap when it came to building erupted. Players started editing way faster than they ever could before, and the players at the top looked like a completely different breed than they did just a couple of seasons ago. So the barrier of entry for new players was increasing dramatically as a result. This meant new players that wanted to try Fortnite for the first time were in an extremely difficult position. Fortnite was no longer a game that you could just hop on with your friends for some casual fun. It was slowly turning into a highly competitive shooter with a stupid high skill gap. This wasn't the only thing that Season 4 did though. Fortnite's move to changing the map drastically would also anger a lot of players. Season 4 saw a meteor hit the center of the map at the location that was previously called Dusty Depot and turned it into the now Dusty Divot. This was something the community was actually open to at the time because more map changes meant more content, but as you'll see, people began souring to this idea as well, and eventually this, combined with the skill gap that was constantly increasing, would push many players away, because throughout the updates over the next few months, the beginning of Fortnite's downfall would begin, and it was quite a nasty one in my opinion. Season 5 really marked the beginning of a sad direction for Fortnite as a whole. This is because around this time is when Epic really started to notice how big the skill gap was and how it was affecting their players. They knew that something had to be done if they wanted any chance of Fortnite having a growing audience. They needed to address this issue, and they needed to do it quickly. However, their approach for solving the building skill gap was to try and alter the meta. Well, you see, at this time, when Fortnite was at its peak, shotguns were extremely strong. You could keep 2 pump shotguns in your inventory and continue to swap to them back and forth until both ran out of ammo. This made build fighting easy because once you got up close, all you had to do was abuse your shotgun. What Epic set out to do in Season 5 was to eradicate this meta entirely. So they removed the ability for players to switch shotguns without having to reload. And to replace them in the meta, they decided to bring in new and buff existing SMGs. The problem was these SMGs were beyond broken. The P90 shredded through walls extremely fast due to its large magazine, and all the SMGs dealt stupid damage to players at close to medium range. This update completely ruined building to a lot of people because of how easy it was to shred through maps. This trend of bad changes would continue into Season 6, where the map changes I talked about earlier would begin to ruin the player's experience. This is because Season 6 brought the addition of zombies onto the map. This change was hated by pretty much everyone who played back then. It was a seemingly needless addition, and it felt like they were just there to function as a nuisance to the player. This feeling of hatred towards zombies can be seen in the Google Trends graph, where the peak of Fortnite at the time was at the start of the season, and its numbers plummeted by the end. And as soon as Season 7 rolled around, the trend continued, and Fortnite was not in for a recovery anytime soon. Now, the reason for this is a little hard to explain, but it's backed up by the statistics. Fortnite made $1.7 billion less in 2019 than they made in 2018. And 2019 had the lowest monthly active players ever recorded. The reason I think Season 7 and subsequent seasons performed so horribly in the eyes of the players is because of the perception that Fortnite was in a bad meta, the fact that a lot of the new content that was being added contributed to this meta, and the map changes that were being done a lot of people disliked. Now, I'm just going to come out and say it. I don't think Fortnite's downfall was entirely Epic's fault. Obviously, Fortnite was going to have a downturn in players and revenue at some point. People won't just keep playing the game forever, despite what some people believe. So I think many around this time, at least from what I was able to gather, were just getting bored of the Fortnite gameplay. Also, as the game grew, it became more and more competitive, as I mentioned earlier. People were learning to edit builds in milliseconds, and it was hard to keep up for many in the casual audience, which would continue to alienate a large amount of players who just wanted to play a casual game with their friends. So the large skill gap they had managed to create with the amazing building system was actually becoming more like a crater, and it led to a lot of players who couldn't keep up to just abandon the game outright. And for the players that enjoyed the high skill gap, they started leaving mainly due to the addition of items and vehicles that were way too strong. The addition of planes, the grappler, which was added a few seasons before, and the infinity blade are great examples. Planes at the time were despised by a lot of people because of players constantly using them to third-party build battles. Grapplers were hated because of their ability to allow someone to rotate extremely fast, and the fact that the grappler was an epic item meant that a player's ability to rotate quickly was mostly left up to RNG, and the infinity blade was honestly the most overpowered thing Fortnite ever added. It allowed players to absolutely shred through builds due to its ability to allow players to jump through literally anything, and it dealt a ridiculous amount of damage to opponents. These items added on to loyal players' beliefs that Fortnite was trying to appeal to a newer, less experienced audience by releasing overpowered items. It was starting to make people who played the game regularly and those who were extremely good at the game turn sour. Then the last cherry on top was the changes being made to the map, which I foreshadowed earlier. Season 7, the same season that messed up the meta in a lot of people's eyes, integrated the snow section into the map. This was a section that many players, including myself at the time, felt was lackluster. It just wasn't something people were very excited about. Also, the removal of Greasy Grove, a fan favorite drop location, to replace it with Frosty Flights didn't go over well. This trend of bad changes, new weapons and items that players dislike, and just the overall decline of Fortnite's reputation would continue throughout Season 8 and Season 9. However, what I would consider to be one of the worst seasons of them all was Season 10. Season 10 saw the introduction of mechs to Fortnite. They were honestly on the level of the Infinity Blade when it came to strength. If you had one of these, you were basically unstoppable. You could shred through players, builds, and anything else that was thrown your way. And the large amount of health that came to boot made it even stronger. However, I would argue this wasn't even the worst part of Season 10. The worst part was the event that was held at the end of the season. This event saw the end of the Fortnite map as we know it and replaced it with what was now a completely different map. Obviously, this is going to be a very subjective point, but it did seem like a large number of players were unhappy with the map getting a pretty big overhaul. And you can see this unhappiness with the mechs of Season 10 and the new map of Chapter 2 Season 1 by looking at the chart once again. As you can see, the player count dropped substantially after the end of Season 11. So those who logged on to try the new changes clearly were not happy. Things would continue like this for Fortnite over the next few seasons. The player count would have a slight resurgence with the release of a new season, but the season would always end with less players than when it started. However, a pretty big worldwide event would happen that would help Fortnite's player count to recover back to what it was a year ago. This event left many people locked in their homes for months on end with little to do. Now, this event can't be named due to YouTube's policies. However, if I said it became extremely prevalent during April of 2020, I'm sure you can figure out what I'm talking about. This global event resulted in lockdowns across the country, which started in the middle of March. This timeline conveniently lines up with my graph here, which saw a huge spike in searches for Fortnite around this time. This would also explain why Fortnite's revenue managed to recover throughout the year of 2020. The game really hadn't swayed far from the direction it was heading in during its downfall. All Fortnite managed to do was capitalize on all their old fans coming back since they had nothing else to do, and take advantage of all the new players coming to gaming for the first time. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to belittle Fortnite or Epic in any way, because pretty much every game saw the same spike in numbers, so it's not like Epic did anything wrong in this situation. I'm just pointing out that this event did have an effect on Fortnite's numbers, just like every other game. And despite this large bump up from its previous numbers, you'll notice even during lockdowns, Fortnite was nowhere near reaching the popularity it once was back before the ridiculous skill gap and large number of meta changes that angered the fan base. Season 13, the one released right after the lockdowns, didn't do anything necessarily wrong either. Everything was just kind of alright. The battle pass was kind of mid, the new items and weapons weren't that interesting, and the map just didn't feel that fun to play. Fortnite just didn't feel like the game most people had grown to love all those years ago. It had evolved into something completely different. So it was tough for people to still enjoy it after this massive evolution. I'm not going to lie, after about Season 8, I completely checked out of Fortnite. And it could have been that I was just not involved in the community, but it felt like it had pretty much fallen off the face of the earth after the end of 2020. The hype behind each season just wasn't like it used to be. Now, when I say Fortnite wasn't performing as well as it used to be, and there was no hype behind its seasons, I want to make things very clear. Fortnite was never dead or even dying. It just went from a game outperforming everything on the market to falling back in line with other games and kind of just becoming a middle-of-the-road title. Also, another thing that was hurting Fortnite's reputation was the fact that it was perceived as a child game. So much so that if you were one of the people who still played Fortnite and enjoyed it, you would get made fun of by the rest of the gaming community. I remember the stigma around Fortnite, especially later in high school and college, was bad. This may just be an experience of my own, and it may not be representative of the entire gaming community, but at least at the time, it felt like that was the case. Things will continue being this way for Fortnite into the foreseeable future. It just kind of faded into the shadow, continuing to make content for its loyal supporters and players, while they secretly worked on something huge behind the scenes. Epic knew that they had to do something massive to recover their tarnished reputation from the mismanaged balancing, bad map changes, and the high barrier of entry. However, their ideas wouldn't be able to solidify themselves for a long time. So Fortnite would continue to function business as usual until Epic was sure they were ready to drop their biggest update yet. As I said, Epic, after the decline of the game, began working on a big update to Fortnite that would hopefully help to bring the game back up to the way it was. Epic began by purchasing Psyonix, the team behind Rocket League. After their purchase, both Psyonix and Epic went silent on the situation. They didn't explain the reasoning behind the acquisition. Psyonix stopped informing their players on what was coming in future updates, and everything in the Rocket League community started slowing down drastically. There were less updates being made to the game and less communication across the board. This led many Rocket League fans to begin to believe something big was coming in the future to the game, and fans began to theorize as to what it could be. But the silence on Epic and Psyonix's part angered a lot of the game's content creators, pro players, and big faces in the community. They were mad because what they thought was going to be a good thing for the game, that being the Epic acquisition, was actually turning into a terrible situation for any major fan of the game. The reason I'm bringing this up is because the fans' assumption about something big coming in the works wasn't incorrect. Epic was planning to have a new mode in Fortnite that would sync with Rocket League, meaning that your cosmetics, Battle Pass, and everything from Rocket League would come into Fortnite. However, this idea took a while to be developed, and in the meantime, the Rocket League community would get more and more frustrated with Epic and Psyonix. Also, this new mode in collaboration with the Rocket League team wasn't the only thing Epic was wanting to bring to Fortnite. They had sealed a huge collaboration with LEGO that was going to allow them to work on another mode accessible directly in the Fortnite menu. So mentioning the Rocket League acquisition and the players' feelings around that time is pretty important to put everything into context. The reason this was becoming such a big focus for Epic was because they wanted Fortnite to turn into a gaming ecosystem similar to Roblox that would allow people to play a large amount of modes without closing Fortnite. This is why they released Creative in Season 7 and continued to build onto it, eventually paying out Fortnite creators 40% of Fortnite's total revenue to hopefully cause more people to start creating. They wanted players to turn into developers and to continue to make their own content to keep people engaged, and eventually, Epic wanted to release their own high-quality content to add into this ecosystem. Whether it be limited time modes or even permanent game modes, Epic knew that their ability to add entirely new ways for people to enjoy Fortnite would allow for higher player counts and more revenue. However, it would take Epic all the way until 2023 to fully realize these ideas, because all of their big projects had a lot of time to cook in the oven. This is why Fortnite and even Rocket League to a lesser degree went through such a long period of underperforming player count-wise, money-wise, and their reputation in their respective communities. Epic was just too focused on this new vision, and this was their top priority. It would take a while, but once they were finally ready to launch, Epic needed to find a way to bring all the attention back that had left them 5 years ago. Their idea to bring attention back to Fortnite to hopefully cause more players to play these new modes that they were developing was to create Fortnite OG. Fortnite OG was a season advertised as bringing the game back to its roots. It was going to have the old map, old loot pool, and everything that players missed about Fortnite. As soon as this was announced and players found out about it, the internet exploded. Everyone was talking about how excited they were to finally see Epic going back to simpler times. So Epic's plan was seeming to work. The news was spreading across the internet, and a massive amount of people were looking forward to playing Fortnite again. Eventually, Epic would release the schedule for Fortnite OG, demonstrating how long the OG season was going to last, what seasons they were going back to, and what to expect from the game. This was a little disappointing to some, since many wanted to see Epic bring us all the way back to season 2 or 3, but this was still enough to continue the hype train up. Then the new update would eventually be released on November 3rd, 2023, around a month ago at the time of writing. If you've been on the internet at all over the past few weeks, you know how big this release was. As soon as the update dropped, Fortnite began breaking its previous records, achieving a whopping 44.7 million players in a single day, which is a ridiculous amount. This shows that Epic's idea to capitalize on nostalgia to bring interest back to the game was working wonders. People missed the way that old Fortnite felt so much that they would come back just to play a newer, worse version of the original just to get a glimpse of what it used to be. You have to keep in mind that Fortnite OG was not an exact copy of the seasons it was set in. That was the new movement Fortnite had created over the years, and from what I could gather, the loot pools were slightly different as well. However, arguably the most important part of the update, the map, was still the same as it was all those years ago. I would argue that the OG map was by far the part that most people missed. The new maps just didn't hit the same as the amazing one we had during Chapter 1. This is why a large majority of the conversations about the update that was happening before it actually dropped were on the map itself. And that is also why I put such a big emphasis on the map changes throughout this video. Yes, the loot pool changes were bad and they did contribute to the game's downfall, but I would argue the map changes were actually the catalyst for people starting to leave the game. This is clearly something that players were irritated with Epic about, so the fact that OG was bringing us back to the original from season 5 to 10 made many people happy. Another thing that helped this season to perform well was the decision by Epic to consistently change it up by updating the game through the old seasons every week or so. This helped to keep people from getting bored while Epic was working on the rollout for the next big project. But as Fortnite OG was coming to a close, a lot of players were curious to see what was coming next. It announced that a Big Bang event was coming pretty early on, and leaks about a new mode in collaboration with Rocket League was beginning to spread. But the exact details of what was actually coming in Chapter 5 was unknown. No one knew what to expect from the next update. However, when it actually released, the game would once again see a massive player count spike, recouping some of the players that left towards the end of the OG season and then some. The reason this season was able to see such a large spike was because of the mystery revolving around what exactly this season included, and because of the sheer amount of new content. However, this season wasn't without its criticisms. The main one levied against Chapter 5 Season 1 is the fact that the game went back to being way too complex. The gun system was completely overhauled to allow for attachments to be added to all your weapons. There was a brand new map with never before seen drop locations, and basically every other system was overhauled. The movement system was changed, healing was reworked to allow players to move while healing, and mantling was changed to allow players to climb up entire buildings. Now, this may seem like a lot of new content, and you think that this would be overwhelmingly positive for the community. Well, as I said, this was still pretty controversial. Many players were enjoying Fortnite OG, as supported by the player spike. They liked it so much due to the partial nostalgia and the fact that it was going back to the game's simpler roots. This season was the game going back in the opposite direction, and despite the sheer amount of content, it was still criticized because of this fact. Players that came back for Fortnite OG just didn't like the fact that Fortnite was doing sweeping changes already. The new movement system felt way too slow and was just clunky to play with, which was by far the biggest criticism. The new map is super controversial and is something that still divides fans. The new attachment system a lot of players dislike and feel as though is just Epic's attempt at becoming more like other battle royales. Almost everyone hates the addition of riot shields and pretty much everything else in the loot pool, and there are many more complaints I'm sure you can find. So I'm sure you're wondering, well, if the season is being lambasted by so many people online, why is it performing so well? The reason for this is because a few days after the season came out, those new game modes that Epic were developing that I talked about earlier were finally starting to roll out to the public. The first of these was the addition of rocket racing, which had its problems, but it still managed to attract a large amount of players to it. It also had the plus side of integrated with Rocket League, as Epic originally intended, allowing for your cosmetics to transfer between the two. This led to players from Rocket League coming over to try this new mode, and it would also, hopefully for Psyonix, bring some of the Fortnite players over to Rocket League. This mode wasn't perfect by any means, but for a side mode that was intended to boost player retention, I think Rocket Racing does its job well. Now, Rocket Racing wasn't the only mode added during this season. A few days ago, LEGO Fortnite was introduced as well. This is a new survival mode similar to LEGO Worlds, and it seems to be by far the most successful mode added. It has clearly brought a ton of new eyes to Fortnite due to its amazing implementation. I would argue that this mode is the best received part of the whole update. The Battle Royale mode is extremely controversial as of right now, and Rocket Racing is fun, but it doesn't feel as fleshed out. Then the last mode added to Fortnite, the Festival mode, which was released 4 days ago at the time of recording, is probably the worst of the bunch. This is because it basically acts as a Guitar Hero competitor that isn't as fleshed out. The reason I say all of this is to show Fortnite's rocky future ahead. The game managed to give the players what they wanted with the release of Fortnite OG. However, immediately after realizing that the game going back to its roots and going to a simpler gameplay loop led to the player base exploding, they decided to make the Battle Royale portion of the game super complicated and completely ruin what OG had done. So this could lead to the game bleeding players over time, like it did all the way back in Chapter 1 and 2. Now, whether this will happen or not is something that we will just have to wait and see. The new modes like Rocket Racing and LEGO Fortnite could help to pick up where the Battle Royale is slacking and help the game hold players despite the Battle Royale's letdowns. Whether you like the newest changes or not to Fortnite, you have to admit that the future for this game is extremely unclear. Considering the player base's consistent distaste for the game trying overcomplicated things, I don't know how long these numbers will last. I love Fortnite right now, and I've been having a ton of fun with it. It's one of the modes I'm putting the most hours into right now, so I hope that it can continue to be wildly successful. But despite my enjoyment for it, I have to acknowledge that the game does have a rocky future ahead. We'll just have to wait and see what the future holds. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, I would appreciate it if you would consider subscribing. I post game reviews and retrospectives on this channel quite regularly that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Also, if you want to watch another video just like this one of popping up on your screen right now, that I suggest you go watch. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.